If you're going to be a leader, you're going to lead a team, you're going to lead students, children, staff, in any area of leadership. And if you're on staff, you are a leader in some way. And the first task of leadership is to continually clarify and communicate vision.
Rick Warren has spent decades guiding millions through purpose, faith, and life's deepest questions. But behind that global influence, an unexpected crisis began unfolding. At the peak of his leadership, his own body started to fail in ways no one saw coming. What followed wasn't just a health issue, it was a personal battle that forced him into vulnerability and silence. As strength faded, a deeper story emerged, revealing how suffering can reshape even the strongest voices of faith. The silent illness that changed Rick Warren's life. For more than 40 years, Rick Warren was known as a steady voice of faith, purpose, and guidance to millions around the world. From crowded church gatherings to best-selling books that reached global audiences, he built a legacy centered on helping others find meaning in their lives. But while his influence continued expanding, something far more personal was quietly unfolding behind the scenes, something that would eventually challenge everything he had built. At first, the signs were easy to overlook. Small physical disruptions began to appear in his daily life, subtle enough to dismiss, but persistent enough to raise concern. What seemed like minor discomfort soon developed into uncontrollable muscle spasms that came without warning. These episodes were not only painful, but deeply disruptive, affecting his ability to move, speak, and even carry out basic routines. As the condition progressed, doctors discovered that these spasms were tied to a rare neurological disorder affecting how his body responded to stress and adrenaline. Instead of reacting normally, his system began triggering overwhelming physical responses that left him shaken, exhausted, and in constant discomfort. What once felt like simple fatigue slowly turned into something far more serious and unpredictable. But the situation did not stop there. Alongside the neurological condition, another diagnosis emerged: an autoimmune disorder that caused ongoing inflammation and widespread pain throughout his body. This meant that even during moments of rest, his body continued fighting itself, draining his strength and limiting his ability to recover. For someone whose life depended on energy, focus, and public speaking, the impact was devastating. Soon after, a separate complication involving brain function made things even more complex. His body struggled to regulate adrenaline properly, which affected his emotional balance, physical stability, and mental clarity. Everyday stressors that most people could handle easily became overwhelming triggers that intensified his symptoms. The combination of these conditions created a cycle that was difficult to break and even harder to manage. For Rick Warren, the man who had spent decades encouraging others to endure suffering with faith, this became a deeply personal test. Simple tasks that once felt natural now required careful planning. Public appearances became unpredictable. Leadership responsibilities grew heavier as his physical limits became more apparent. Yet, despite the worsening condition, he continued to carry his responsibilities quietly, without drawing attention to his struggle. Eventually, the weight of his health challenges began forcing difficult conversations about his future. The idea of stepping back from the role he had held for so long became unavoidable. After more than 4 decades of leadership at Saddleback Church, Rick Warren made the difficult decision to step down as senior pastor in 2021. The announcement shocked many, marking the end of an era that had shaped modern evangelical leadership. But even in stepping away, his story was far from over. What appeared to be an ending was actually the beginning of a new and unexpected chapter, one where faith would be tested not through leadership, but through limitation, endurance, and personal transformation. And what came next would reveal a different side of his journey that few had ever seen before. Rick Warren's childhood and the seed of his calling. Long before Rick Warren became a global voice in faith and purpose, his story began in a quiet, unassuming town in California. There were no crowds, no stage lights, and no hint that he would one day influence millions around the world. Instead, his early life was shaped by simplicity, discipline, and a deep exposure to faith lived out in everyday life rather than spoken from a distance. Born Richard Dwayne Warren in San Jose and raised in Ukiah, his upbringing was rooted in a small community where values were formed through experience, not reputation. His father, Jimmy Warren, served as a Baptist pastor while also working as a carpenter. That combination of spiritual leadership and hands-on labor left a lasting impression on Rick, showing him early on that faith was not just something preached, it was something built step by step through service and sacrifice. His mother, Dot, played an equally important role in shaping his mindset. As a librarian, she introduced him to books, ideas, and curiosity about the world beyond his surroundings. Together, his parents created a balance of spiritual grounding and intellectual growth, giving Rick both direction and imagination as he grew up. Faith was not treated as an occasional practice in their home. It was woven into everyday decisions, conversations, and struggles. One of the most defining moments of his childhood came unexpectedly. Rick once overheard his father praying late at night, asking God for the strength to build just one more church before his life ended. That simple, emotional prayer stayed with him far longer than he realized at the time. It planted a quiet but powerful idea in his mind, that life could be devoted to something far greater than personal success or comfort. As Rick grew older, he was not the most outspoken or popular student, but he carried a strong sense of direction. He spent his time reading theology, studying scripture, and quietly forming ideas about leadership and faith. While others were still trying to figure out their identity, Rick was already developing a sense of calling that felt deeply personal, even if he did not fully understand it yet. During his high school years, that sense of purpose began to take shape in action. He founded the Fishers of Men Club, the first Christian student group in his school. It was a bold move at the time, especially in a setting where religious expression was not always embraced openly. Still, Rick pushed forward, showing early signs of the leadership style that would later define his ministry: direct, intentional, and focused on reaching those often left out. After graduating, he continued his education at California Baptist University before later studying at Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary and Fuller Theological Seminary. But even as he pursued academic training, he never lost sight of a deeper goal. He wasn't just preparing for a career in ministry. He was searching for a way to reach people who felt disconnected from traditional religious structures. That search eventually led to a bold decision that changed everything. In 1980, Rick and his wife Kay moved to Orange County with no congregation, no building, and no established following. What they carried instead was a vision and a belief that something new could begin from nothing. That leap of faith would soon give rise to a movement that no one could have predicted at the time. And from that uncertain beginning, a small gathering would slowly grow into something far larger than anyone imagined, setting the stage for the birth of Saddleback Church. The first service that changed everything. On Easter Sunday in 1980, Rick Warren and his wife Kay stepped into a borrowed high school theater with no congregation, no reputation, and no guarantee that anyone would even show up. There was no polished stage or established structure, just a simple vision and a message they believed mattered. That first gathering brought in around 200 people, many of them stepping into a church environment for the very first time in their lives. Rick's first message, centered on the idea of a daring faith, set the tone for what was to come. It was not filled with complex theology or formal tradition. Instead, it spoke directly to real struggles: fear, uncertainty, relationships, and purpose. That approach immediately set him apart. People weren't just listening to religious teaching, they were hearing something that felt practical, relatable, and personal. In the early days, nothing about the church was stable or permanent. There was no building to call home, which meant services constantly shifted locations. School gyms, rented halls, community spaces, and even outdoor setups became temporary meeting points. Every week required volunteers to set up chairs, equipment, and sound systems, only to pack everything down again afterward. It was exhausting work, but it created something powerful, a sense of unity and shared mission. Instead of weakening the church, the lack of structure actually strengthened its identity. People weren't drawn by appearance or tradition, but by connection. As the 1980s progressed, word began to spread across Southern California. More and more people started attending, especially those who felt disconnected from traditional church environments. Rick's message continued focusing on everyday life rather than religious formality. By 1993, after years of constant movement and rapid growth, Saddleback Church finally opened its first permanent campus in Lake Forest. It marked a major turning point. What once began in borrowed space had now become a structured, established church with thousands attending weekly services. The growth reflected something deeper than numbers. It showed that a simple, purpose-driven message could resonate on a massive scale. Rick later expanded this vision through his writings. His book, The Purpose-Driven Church, introduced a structured framework for building healthy congregations centered on worship, fellowship, discipleship, ministry, and mission. It quickly became a guide for church leaders worldwide. But the real global breakthrough came in 2002 with The Purpose-Driven Life, a book that reached far beyond church walls and into homes, workplaces, and even public institutions. What started as a small gathering in a borrowed theater had now become a worldwide movement influencing millions. But as Saddleback Church continued to grow, so did the responsibility, pressure, and expectations placed on Rick Warren. And behind the success story, a different kind of weight was slowly building, one that would soon test everything he had built. How Rick Warren's message reached the entire world. As Saddleback Church continued expanding, Rick Warren's influence began reaching far beyond the walls of any single congregation. His teachings were no longer just heard in church services, they were being read, studied, and shared across different countries, cultures, and even professional spaces. What started as a local ministry was now evolving into a global voice centered on one idea: purpose. In 1995, he published The Purpose-Driven Church, a book that introduced a structured approach to building healthy and sustainable congregations. It focused on 5 key areas: worship, fellowship, discipleship, ministry, and mission. The message was simple but powerful, and it quickly became a guide for church leaders around the world who were searching for clarity in how to grow and lead their communities. But the true turning point came in 2002 with the release of The Purpose-Driven Life. Unlike traditional religious texts, it was written in a way that felt personal and accessible, designed as a 40-day journey for anyone searching for meaning. It didn't just speak to believers, it reached people struggling with identity, direction, and emotional uncertainty. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Millions of copies were sold within a short period, and eventually, the book would go on to sell over 50 million copies worldwide. It was translated into dozens of languages and became one of the most widely distributed Christian books in modern history. Its message crossed boundaries that most religious works never reached. The influence didn't stop at everyday readers. Public figures, athletes, and world leaders also referenced its teachings. Olympic swimmer Michael Phelps shared how the book helped him during personal struggles. Even political figures like George W. Bush and Barack Obama acknowledged its impact in public discussions. The idea of living with purpose had moved far beyond religion. It had entered mainstream culture. As his global reach expanded, Rick Warren also became known for his personal financial decisions. He publicly stated that he donated a large portion of his income to charitable causes and even returned earnings accumulated over decades. He and his wife, Kay, chose to continue living in the same modest home they had owned for years, reinforcing a message of simplicity and stewardship that contrasted with many other high-profile religious leaders. Saddleback Church itself transformed into a global network with multiple campuses and international outreach programs. Weekly attendance grew into the tens of thousands, and online services reached audiences across continents. What had once been a small gathering in a borrowed theater was now a worldwide movement, shaping conversations about faith and purpose. But with global recognition came a new kind of pressure. The larger the influence grew, the heavier the expectations became. And slowly, beneath the success and recognition, unseen challenges began forming. Pressures that would eventually lead to a deeply personal and painful turning point. When faith couldn't stop the pain. Behind Rick Warren's global success, a deeply personal crisis struck his family in a way no achievement or influence could prevent. After years of building a life centered on purpose and faith, he and his wife Kay were suddenly confronted with a pain that would redefine everything they believed about suffering and hope. On April 5th, 2013, their youngest son, Matthew, passed away at the age of 27 after a long and painful struggle with mental illness. From a young age, Matthew battled severe depression, a condition that persisted despite years of medical treatment, counseling, and spiritual support. No matter how many efforts were made, the internal struggle never fully went away. His passing sent shockwaves not only through the Warren family, but also across the global community that had followed Rick's teachings for years. The man who had spoken so often about purpose, hope, and endurance was now facing a loss that defied simple explanations. Rick later described the grief as something beyond words, a kind of pain that could not be resolved through sermons or answers. In his message to his church, he spoke openly about Matthew's kindness and quiet strength, even while battling invisible emotional pain. But he also admitted there were questions that had no easy answers, especially when faith collides with deep personal loss. Instead of stepping away from public life, Rick slowly returned to his role with a different perspective. The grief did not disappear, but it reshaped the way he spoke, taught, and connected with others. Together with Kay, he helped launch initiatives focused on mental health awareness, aiming to break the silence surrounding emotional struggles inside faith communities. What emerged from this tragedy was not closure, but a new direction, one centered on compassion, honesty, and acknowledging pain that often goes unseen. Yet even as they began helping others heal, another challenge was quietly developing in Rick Warren's life, one that would test his own strength in a completely different way. And as his journey continued forward, it became clear that the next chapter would not only be about loss, but about how he chose to endure everything that came after. Rick Warren's final chapter of faith and endurance. After years of leadership, global influence, and deeply personal loss, Rick Warren entered a new season of life that looked very different from the one he once led from the pulpit every week. In 2021, he stepped down as senior pastor of Saddleback Church after more than 4 decades of service. For many, it marked the end of an era. But for Rick, it was not a withdrawal from purpose. It was a shift into a different kind of calling. Even after stepping away from weekly preaching, his work did not stop. Instead, his focus expanded into global mentoring, leadership training, and initiatives designed to equip the next generation of pastors and church leaders. Through efforts like the Finishing the Task Coalition, his influence continued reaching churches across different countries, helping expand ministry work and strengthen leadership structures worldwide. At the same time, the pain from earlier chapters of his life never fully disappeared. The loss of his son, Matthew, remained a defining wound, but it also became a driving force behind his advocacy for mental health awareness. Together with Kay Warren, he helped support programs that encouraged open conversations about emotional struggles, breaking long-standing stigma inside faith communities. Their message was simple but powerful. Faith and mental health can coexist, and no one should suffer in silence. But while his mission continued outward, Rick himself faced ongoing health challenges that forced him to slow down. His neurological condition and autoimmune issues continued affecting his strength, mobility, and energy levels. For someone once known for endurance and constant activity, this new reality required adjustment, patience, and acceptance. Rather than hiding his struggles, Rick began speaking more openly about them. He often reminded audiences that suffering is not a sign of weakness, but a shared human experience. His message gradually shifted away from achievement and toward endurance. Instead of focusing on success, he began emphasizing perseverance, especially the kind that holds on to faith even when circumstances feel confusing or painful. This change in perspective reshaped how people viewed his legacy. It was no longer defined only by rapid church growth or best-selling books, but by a deeper emphasis on resilience in the face of uncertainty. It highlighted the idea that faith is not only measured in victories, but also in the ability to continue believing when life takes unexpected turns, when outcomes are unclear, and when control is limited. Over time, his story came to represent more than public success. It became a reflection of human endurance, of choosing to move forward despite disappointment, delay, or unanswered questions. And as his journey continues to be discussed and interpreted, one truth becomes more evident. The most meaningful impact a person can leave behind is not always found in accomplishments alone. Sometimes it is revealed in how someone carries their struggles, processes pain, and still finds the strength to keep going, even when the path ahead is uncertain. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, please like and subscribe for more powerful real-life journeys. Comment your thoughts below and watch the next video for more inspiring content.